Recording in progress.
Good evening. This is the December uh, West Side Computer Club meeting. Sanford couldn't be with us tonight. I know why, but I'll leave it up to him in a future meeting to stipulate if he wants to why he wasn't here tonight. So I'm just filling in, and it was kind of ironic. I had notified him of tonight's meeting topic for him to do, either this month or next month. And so I'm doing it since he can't be with us. But I am no expert at this, and I thought it most interesting type of video that we're going to cover. Hang on one second. Okay, one of the first things I want to do is something that Sanford would have done, and that is what did you guys get between Black Friday and Cyber Monday? You can't all speak up at one time.
Well, I've ordered a new office chair after about 20 years.
The only thing I did was I added to my Macaron Reflect accounts.
Oh, yeah, that was something I did. And they have a really great deal for people who have had the perpetual license for Macaron Reflect 8. It's half the price of the Black Friday price.
Right.
And I took advantage of that for 4 licenses, $12.50 each, plus tax. So I'm set up for 2025, at least up until November.
Yeah, me too. Well,
And it's a great Reflect 10 is a great program. It's a good version, good upgrade, a good upgrade. It runs nice and fast too.
well, Bert, did you get yourself anything?
Yeah, I got my Veterans Coast Guard hat,
That
which
you got for
shows that I was in the Coast Guard 1967 to 1973.
you got that for Black Friday through Cyber Monday?
Yep.
All right. How about you, Bob Baxter?
Well, somewhat as a joke, but with some serious note, because I collect these things. I got a nice Chicago baseball hat.
Yeah, but you should have gotten some batteries and an inverter. Then you'd had electricity. How about you, Aldo?
I'm still working on putting my mini PC together.
How about you, Harry?
Oh, not this time.
Yeah, well, a lot of other people are in the same boat, so don't feel bad. All right. Anybody got any problems, questions, comments, things others need to know about?
Yeah. But I have something. It's a question regarding Windows updating to 24H2. I just saw the invitation to install it on my little mini PC. Now I
Yes.
did some reading and most of them say, hey, wait a little while. The question
Well,
is, how long do we wait?
be careful. Original release, some people were able to update their system a-okay. A lot of people had a problem. So Microsoft withdrew it from Windows Update, but they re-released it. I know at least as of Saturday because I have a machine that also got the invitation, so I did upgrade. But the first time I did it, it was near the end and it ran out of space. So I had to go in, clean out the temporary files that they always create, plus other garbage, and reduce uh, taking up space because it's kind of a small drive. And then I restarted it again on Sunday, and it took the whole afternoon to get done.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's
Uh,
a major update. That's not a joke.
this update is more like the old-fashioned upgrades. It is an entire full operating system replacement.
Right.
The sources I follow on the internet say hold off. There's still too many bugs going through it.
Well,
Okay.
that could be, but generally speaking, on most of the upgrades in the past, some of these bugs may last all the way into December. The
Yeah.
question is, do you want to wait that long? Right now, I decided to at least try it out on this machine. It was fully
Yeah.
backed up. And that's the key, Aldo. You never, ever, do an upgrade like this on your primary system. You use it on a secondary system that if something goes wrong, who cares? Two, before you ever do it, you always must do a complete system backup that's verified to be good before you start the update. Number three, this time around, instead of including my 24H2 with any remaining 23H2 updates, it gave me only the 23H2 updates, finished them off, restarted, configured them, and then I went back in and it gave me the option to upgrade the 24H2. And this may be in part because it is such a major upgrade compared to prior years, including Windows 10.
Yeah. This is again well in line with this being the same thing as doing a full version upgrade.
Right. Actually, in a matter of speaking, it would almost be like doing a clean install, but it will keep your existing add-on programs. It will keep your data files.
Yeah, that's also known as an over-the-top reinstall.
Right.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's also the equivalent of a inline install. That's what I think you're calling over the top. The
Yeah.
inline means that you have a running system, you have the media, whether it's just the ISO file or you have a flash drive with the OS. You bring it up in File Explorer, you click on settings, and it does an in place upgrade.
Right.
If it's on a flash drive and you boot the computer with it, that's an outside upgrade, and it does do a clean install most of the time, not a real upgrade. So you would lose your installed programs, their settings, and your data files. Which
Yeah,
you
I think those terms are online upgrade and offline upgrade. Although offline would imply no internet connection.
right, but usually there is because it
Yes, there
wants
must
to
be.
check for updates to start with, and it wants to do some other odds and ends.
Yeah, it has to perform certain checks.
Yeah,
And so it does have an internet connection. But anyway, there's several terms for it. The take home lesson is this is a big upgrade. It's going to take a long time. Set aside some time. After it's done, you probably will want to familiarize yourself with the changes.
and
So
that
allow time for that.
And that's why I am saying you don't do your primary machine, because if something really bad goes wrong, you don't have your primary machine to do whatever you do on it to begin with, let alone probably attend Zoom meetings, whether it's this group or some other group. It doesn't matter. And you always take a secondary machine. The one I did upgrade, it's actually probably at this point it's a trinary machine because I have lots of machines as a tech. I do a lot of experimenting. I spread the load of my primaries. I have multiple primaries because I do certain things on certain computers and others on other computers, etc. Then I have secondary computers. Then I have trinary computers. And that's just so that I can take, and if I something really bad goes wrong, like a month ago, I could have tried 24H2. And if I did it on a trinary or a secondary machine, okay, I would be miffed if I didn't have a full backup before I did it. But as long as I did, it's lost time, yes, of things I could have been doing otherwise. But I didn't take out any of my primary machines.
Yeah.
And
I
that's
understand. My situation is I have just one little machine, so I only do
and
one.
that's some big mistake. Although I'll tell you right now, most of the people that I help with remote help, I recommend they have at least two machines, a primary and a secondary. Why? Because I can communicate on one of the machines, and the one I'm working on, I communicate with a different package to do my work. If they only have one, like you're saying, and a lot of people are doing the same thing, you are going to have problems getting a support, especially if your machine isn't running.
Okay,
How do
yeah.
you get help?
I see the
Anybody's help.
dilemma. I see the dilemma, and I understand, yes. So
So
then the question is, do I wait till January maybe to update, keeping my fingers crossed?
you better keep your eyeballs crossed because right now I can't give you any absolute. And the reason is we don't know all the reasons as to why some people crashed and burned their systems and got blue screens of death, and other people, Bert Goodyear, in the meeting, he had no trouble updating it a month ago. Okay. Okay, now why did some of them crash and burn and other people were able to update without a hitch? Until you know that answer to that question, nobody can answer your question.
Okay. And doing some of the reading, some people was having problems with their USB was no longer being recognized, cameras were not recognized, so
Oh, there
and
were a myriad of problems galore. That's
yeah.
why they withdrew it from Windows Update, but you could still download 24H2. I did, and I put it on two sticks here.
Huh.
One of them is normal for my supported Windows 11 machines. The other one is unsupported machines that I do run Windows 11 on. That's older hardware that does not natively support Windows 11 because of its hardware restrictions. But that's not for everybody. That
Okay.
unsupported, you have to have a certain personal characteristics that make you a do-it-yourselfer, a person who has some mechanical aptitude, such as it used to be. I don't think it's as prevalent anymore. Around Christmas time, people would get presents, some assembly required. Well, usually in a lot of families, one person had the mechanical aptitude and they had to put everybody's gifts together to give it back to them.
Okay.
So if you're not mechanically aptitude, a do-it-yourselfer, somebody who likes to try and fix things before giving up and either throwing it away or buying a replacement, etc., the unsupported 11 is not for you. Okay. And that even applied way back with Windows 10, but not to the same extent. But there, I'm as a tech, I also have lots of old hardware. I get a kick out of seeing new versions of Windows. How far back in my old hardware can I go and still have it run reasonably well that you could use it in a pinch, so to speak? Whereas that's not true with most people. Most people are not, shall we say, pack rats, which I can be with all my computers and various parts that I collect. And it gives me an edge in certain situations, but it also takes up a lot of space. And my place, half the time, actually more than half the time, looks like a junkyard. Okay, well, that goes with the type of personality I've got. I like trying to figure out the problems, some of which are the ones that come up in 24H2. But there, I didn't get the offer in time. I never saw it. They had already withdrawn it. By the time I would have possibly seen the offer. But also, too, that's in part because I work on so many different machines. I pulled down the 24H2 and I have that. And there's a good chance that within the next month here of December that I'm going to pull it down again and rebuild these two flash drives before I start using them. And I will use them on secondary and trinary machines before I do anything else.
Understood.
And it's not a joke. And actually, there's one person that comes to mind, and he's out of the Linux only group. And he only had one machine, and he was running into some real problems in it. And I came across a sweet deal, and I got him to buy a secondary machine. I helped get that set up, and then I've had to use this twin computer setup. I'm talking to him on one machine while either doing physical work and or online work as an administrator on his equipment. Because I do both hardware and software. Tom O'Connor here. He had some problems, but he did have two machines, though one of them I'm not sure I would ever call a computer. It's a point of view. It happens to be a laptop, and it's the AMD A series chips, which were plain garbage. In fact, if you ever even think of getting an A series CPU chip by AMD, make sure it's either A4, A6, or A8. They at least have 4 cores. All the other versions only have 2 core. And it really kills you just trying to run Windows 10 on the machine, let alone you're not going to probably even be able to run 11 on it, even as an unsupported version. I wouldn't want to do it. And I know of a person who has an A9 laptop. and 10 was such a dog, it was a useless computer. Absolutely useless. And I know lots of tricks of being able to pull power out of any system setup, and nothing I did would ever work on that thing worth a nickel. And I remember articles of people who do benchmark testing. They were saying flat out, the best A series CPU by AMD at best was just subpar to a Core i3 processor. So that means everything else was even lower, down towards an Atom processor. Bert, you had your hand up?
Yeah, over the holidays lately, Walmart had a whole bunch of systems for $129 that were 4 megabytes of memory and 128. Well, so they were Windows 11S. So you can talk about that a little bit. I don't know how those, people who bought that, but for $129, I'm not sure it was priced enough to just have something run in a browser.
I didn't notice them. I wasn't looking. I've been too busy, but I wouldn't touch it because of one issue that you just brought up. 4 gigs of memory. The absolute minimum for almost doing nothing on your computer, in my opinion, is 8. And the more you do, the more you got to have 16 and nowadays even higher amounts of main memory.
Well, the fact that HP had these computers for that low a price is something we've never really seen before, even if it's in S mode and it had Office on it. But you certainly couldn't add any other programs
Oh, yes, you can.
because it was S mode.
No, that's incorrect. S mode is classified as a student mode operating system that is a contender against Chromebooks, but it never really took a hold like they were hoping. And you can add apps, but only from the Microsoft Store, no other source. Second, you can change that to Windows Home or Pro. You might need a license, depending on which version is in the chip. It will give you a warning that will scare most people. Basically speaking, if you replace Windows S with regular Windows, you cannot change it back. It's a one-way street only. But for most people that have ever had the S, they do look up and they know, hey, I can change this to a normal Windows operating system and be able to use my computer that I just bought, just like anybody else uses theirs. The limitation, though, of 4 gigabytes of memory is a killer, uh, especially with 11. But with the small hard drive, or SSD is what it is, since 2019, Microsoft has been pushing, except for the real low-end machines, using only SSDs for storage, uh, though they may still, in real cheap machines, use a spinning hard drive. The
It
bad
was 64 something.
Yes, but that 64 barely gets 11 to run. I have done it on a 128. And if you save much in the way of documents and put on your own programs, you get to a point where 24H2 doesn't work. you haven't got enough space and it'll fail. That's what happened on the one machine I now have on 24H2. I got rid of a lot of the garbage and I think I took off one or two programs as well. But bottom line is, by doing that, the second time I tried it, it worked. It went all the way through. It's got 24H2 just fine. But that also means I can't save a lot on the system because of a possible future upgrade that needs more space. Normally, on most of my systems, I have at least a 250 gigabyte or a 256 gigabyte drive. That way, I can save documents, I can have quite a number of programs and still be a-okay. If the day comes I need more space, I can take that 256 and upgrade it to a 512 or 500 or 480 drive and then expand out the C drive as much as I can on the space, and I'm just fine. I've done that on the two machines directly in front of me. But it's a case where you have to understand, if you buy this for a kid, hey, that cheap little machine might be great because they can't tinker with it unless they are smart enough to go out on the internet and learn how to change that to normal Windows. If they are crazy enough to do it with only that limited main memory and limited storage, because then you have to know how to open the systems up and be able to add or replace components you already have with something new that is more voluminous, such as taking out that 4 and putting in 16 gigs of memory as an example, taking out the 64 gigabyte storage and putting in a 256 or bigger. But most
Yeah,
people, when they get new machines, they get a terabyte or more, and most of them don't need it. Most of them only need less than 256. Bob?
yeah. With most of the S mode machines, there are several problems. A lot of them had everything soldered down,
Yep,
so you could not replace it or
right.
upgrade it. I and sometimes what they were calling an SSD was really memory that was of the same class as a camera card.
Yes, eMMC
Yeah,
memory. And
my Chromebook is like that.
only that is actually faster than an SD card or a regular USB flash drive, but it's much slower than a regular SSD.
Mhm.
I think eMMC generally was a factor of 3 times faster than a spinning hard drive versus
Uh,
10 for an SSD.
yeah, but also eMMC is more fragile. It tends not to last as long.
Yes, that's very true too.
My Chromebook is beginning to run into that problem.
Well, the one thing with it depends on whether they soldered the MC in or if they instead uh, had that at least socketed, in which case you can get larger capacity ones.
Yeah, I haven't looked into it in that detail for my Chromebook, but it is doing interesting
They
things.
tend to get a little more expensive because there isn't as big a demand, but they go anywhere between, I think, the oldest ones were either 4 gig or 8 gig in size, and I know they go at least to 256. I have one that's a 128, and I had several that are 32 gigabyte.
Yeah, well, if you want to take something that's already underpowered and try to salvage it, that might be a good idea. But if you want to put your money where it'll get the most bang for the buck, probably a complete system upgrade would be in order.
Oh yes, it depends upon uh, things like do you have spare parts laying around like I do or not, and if you have to buy, what would the new parts cost versus replacing the system?
Right.
How much of an improvement are you likely to get? Bert?
Yeah. Well, of course, these laptops look like an expensive laptop. They look, they're HP identical parts in terms of the outside. Also, the processors they talk about start with an N.
In
What are
processors
those
are
processors?
Adler Lake. You got N95, N97, N100. These, I think, are 64-bit processors. I think they are the replacements for the old Atom 32-bit processor because they're on the lower end. But you get something like those chips, they'll run better than any Atom system ever did. And that's not a joke. Uh, so it's kind of a headache situation there. The If they have in there the N series processor, those are real low end machines. It would take a person like me to seriously get it real dirt cheap and know how to make a few upgrades to it if possible. The
Is
only
that
way,
above or high bigger than a Celeron or less?
well, a Celeron is higher performance than the N series chips.
Mhm.
And then you have Pentium chips, and then you have Core i3, 5, 7, 9. And then you have the AMD Ryzen series. And
Now, is
actually,
Intel changing their titling of these things now?
pardon?
Intel is.
Yeah, Intel now has Ultra Core also. What that means, it has an NPU integrated in it. AMD also has many CPU chips with NPUs integrated in it. For those that want to have um, in-house AI capabilities on one or more of their machines, most people don't really need it, will probably never benefit enough from it to justify uh, almost double the cost of the machine just because it has the NPU integrated into the Ultra chip or the AMD equivalent.
I assume that'll be the future type machines we'll be seeing.
Oh, they're already out. They've been out for over 6 months now, Nat. But the current ones are only based on ARM CPU chips with the NPU. And very shortly, I can't tell you exactly when, all the other manufacturers that make machines by Intel CPU and or AMD CPU will be coming out with both Copilot Plus versions versus non-Copilot Plus versions that are like the machines most of us are using right now. So it's a case where uh, everything I looked at, uh, I could get a non-NPU machine for at least we'll say in the $500-600 territory. For NPU, the same box, just with a different CPU chip, it would run anywhere between $1,000 and $1,200, and there were some that were even more than that. Now, if you can cost justify spending twice as much just so you can say, I got a machine here that's got the NPU built into it, the first question I got for you is, what are you using that NPU chip for? And if they can't answer the question, Why did they spend twice as much?
I
Uh,
assume the future will bring the software up to use that feature.
it's those features are already there, released. There'll be more and more coming, but the purpose of having an NPU in your local computer is so that you're not reliant upon the existing AI through your browser or an app on your existing machine to a supercomputer somewhere. Instead, you'll have some of the AI processing capability in that CPU chip on your own system, whether you've got the internet available or not.
Yeah, I was going to say you get to do local processing, and therefore they can put AI components into software packages, and they don't have to insist that you go to the cloud or that you use only web apps.
Right. And so it's that kind of a deal. But right now, the question for a lot of people is, why do I need an NPU? Why do I even want AI? There's still a large portion of computer users that have no idea what AI is and what it may or may not be able to help them with. So until it becomes crystal clear to them it's a needed thing, why would you spend the extra money? Especially with a lot of people screaming they ain't got enough money as is, inflation, the cost of everything. Look at if you want to go out and buy a new car. What would your car upgraded to the present cost you if you had to, wanted to replace it right now? And if you
I
can
think
get,
they said that today that the Chat CPT was getting a million accesses a minute or something.
I wouldn't doubt it.
could be.
Worldwide, quite possibly. I mean, when something's new, the novelty of it alone is going to guarantee a large number of hits. But we'll see what happens as it shakes out.
Well, the Lord,
By the way, Google search results now use Gemini AI routinely and give a summary. I have found that to be quite useful sometimes, but other
well,
times a bit misleading, so I have to follow a little bit down the page and see what they really meant.
on Edge, their search, even whether it's with Bing or somewhere someone else, is using Copilot in the same vein.
Yeah, it's not as well integrated into the
No,
search as Gemini is.
that's right. And
Gemini is really good at integrating into the search and pulling up current information.
right. Well, it's built
And
logically different. I can tell
yeah,
you that much.
it's built to complement the search engine, purpose built for that.
Right.
At least unless the Justice Department succeeds in taking them on, which I don't think is going to happen.
Oh, I think it is seriously, and but it's they're going to try and break up some of it, like getting rid of some. I'm not sure all of the advertising stuff, and they might even go as far as having them to sell the Chrome browser.
Yeah, that's what is sought by the current DOJ. But remember, there's going to be a DOJ that's really DJT.
Well, I understand what that is. It's just a case where I think that, they may even go farther than the current DOJ.
I'm thinking less.
Yeah,
Anyway, there are
whatever.
people coming into the administration who are heavily invested in this sort of thing. And this could influence the future of our computers and the AI that we will or will not be using. Linux claims right now that they are not going to include a lot of AI in 2025. But that doesn't mean they won't do it in future years.
That's right. And I think it's probably behooves them to uh, go the slow route, integrating it in versus anybody on Linux. They can partake of the AI we've been having by just opening up a browser and going to Copilot, to Gemini, to Claude, and a trillion other AI programs out there to do a lot of the things they might want to do. Now, if you're in creative endeavors, which some might even say includes politics. But I'm thinking like advertising, sales,
Yeah.
uh, making up the graphics and or music that might be used by other people or organizations. Those people and natural researchers on medicine, or almost anything else, they may benefit from the AI as far as that goes. But the
True.
average person, not as much.
The other thing about Linux is that Linux users, being the kind of people they generally are, may prefer to build their own large language models, LLMs, and I run them off their own arrays of computers. And that may be what's going to happen. It becomes something you can put in,
Could be.
but isn't native.
Right.
Whereas with Windows, with Google, whatever they come up with by way of a new operating system, with Apple, they have to bake it in because everything is not so transparent to the user.
Yes. All right. I'm going to try and get the program going, and hopefully we'll have a little time afterwards in case there's questions about it. Remember, I am not a genealogist person, so I hope anybody who has questions, somebody else in the group knows more about it than I do. APCUG organization has had a number of presentations, and I know of one other group in the area here that has had a few in genealogy. And there's a woman in particular, I don't remember her name. Um, she lives in Pennsylvania, that's very renowned in genealogy research and is a great resource of information how to find things and use other resources to collect family information. So let's see what I can terrorize you guys with. Bring that up. And boy, this gets to be a real big headache. Come on. All right. And I gotta get that. And I'm gonna stop the share for a moment. I gotta find a an entry. Sorry about that. Let's see here. Where's it at? Go. Now, I'm going to put this link in the chat for anybody who wants it because I'm not doing a handout today. And paste that. Hit enter. And okay, I got that. Got to get you out of my way though. And you're going to start going, aren't you? You little son of a gun. Hang on a minute. This, no thanks. And stop there. All right. Now, Sorry about that, but I had the video sometimes starts up automatically, and I don't like it. All right, got that. Come on. When I click on something, do it. All right. And you're going to give me a hit. There we go. Got rid of most of it. And that. I almost forgot. I gotta. I'm sorry about this. I'm a little bit uncoordinated at the moment. Come on. And optimize. All right. Let's try this out.
All right. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We, as you may know, recently did a plenary session, the four of us, at the National Genealogical Society Conference 2024. And we talked about the use of AI with regard to genealogical research and different aspects of the AI. And unfortunately, an hour was not nearly long enough. We had so much fun. We had so many questions we couldn't get to. We had all kinds of things that we wanted to talk about and just didn't have time to talk about. So we thought we'd come together and maybe record a little bit of some of the questions or concepts we wanted to cover in sort of a post-plenary session. One thing I'll note before we start is, again, we really appreciate the opportunity that NGS gave us to have this session. And you can still get access to that session as well as the other sessions at the conference. And we will provide that link in the notes to this as well. So if you want to do that, as of right now, you can still purchase that access. That's probably for a limited time. So you might want to jump on that now if you can. So we had, like I said, lots of different topics that we wanted to cover. And one of them was, what is one of your top AI tool recommendations for genealogy? I'll jump in first for that one. And interestingly, the two final words for genealogy is, I think, potentially what throws people off sometimes. And so I think I might back up personally and say, what is one of your top AI recommendations? And or tool recommendations. And honestly, I find myself just jumping back and forth among probably a small number of tools, because personally I am using these AI tools not for any type of genealogical research, not even remotely touching on primary genealogical research. What I'm using it for is little things here and there, right? So I'll use a tool like ChatGPT to, I'll run into a concept that I don't really understand, or I want it to come up with an analogy, and I'll just ask it to do that. And that one helps me understand things. It might help me express it in a way I wasn't going to express it previously, and that way is potentially better than the way I was going to express it. So I don't have a tool for genealogy. I guess I have a tool I use to pull in various aspects of AI use, generally around the understanding concepts and crafting words. And really, ChatGPT is the one I'm running to at the current time the most, in part because getting over the hurdle of what I've learned initially is a big hurdle. And so that's where I've been primarily. What about you, Dana?
Yeah, so like you, Blaine, I don't really use AI right now for research, especially since we're talking primarily about large language models, LLMs, or generative AIs, and not, we use AI all many other ways, and we have for many years in different parts of our lives. But as far as those AIs we're talking about, the main ones, which are the three main ones popular right now, are ChatGPT, Claude, and Gemini. And I use two of them a lot every day. And so the two I use is ChatGPT. That was the one we all got started on because for the first more than a year, it was really the only contender and the others just weren't measuring up. So I still fall back, and I thought I'd have trouble transitioning to anything else. But I found for writing, which I'm often using it to help me write things, help anything with writing, I really like Claude. I think Claude is just more natural, more me. But if I'm going to do something, I do a lot of tech help stuff, like help me with Word, help me with Excel. And that I still fall back to ChatGPT. But I love them both. And ChatGPT is where I do most of my images too. I know a lot of you probably have seen some of my images. So I love using ChatGPT for that. So those are the main ones I use.
Excellent. Steve?
Um, Great question. And I'm glad to be on here, the inaugural episode of, we won't call this Dana's AI After Dark, the NCS follow up, but that's what it feels like, the after show episode, which feels like a lot of fun. Like both Blaine and Dana, these tools are not exclusively genealogical. They are, the phrase I'd like to use is eminently transferable. So you're learning how to use a skill like to talk or use a keyboard or a word processor or a spreadsheet, and you may use it for genealogy or you may use it for something else. So, and I loved how both Blaine and Dana mentioned specific models they use. I'm going to recommend a way to use more than one model at a time, especially if you are working on a genealogical prompt and you're not sure, is this prompt going to work better with Claude or ChatGPT? There's a TV show, if you've got cable TV, BattleBots, where students and other folks have build robots that fight each other. Well, there's a chatbot arena. If you've ever heard folks talk about why some of these models are considered better or stronger than the other, those aren't just personal opinions. There's actually a lab out of Berkeley where the graduate students at Berkeley, and it's called, oh goodness, yes, the Large Model Systems Organizations, or LMSYS. The URL is chat.lmsys.org, but it's called the Chatbot Arena. If you just Google, this is the last time you'll ever have to use Google, but if you just Google Chatbot Arena, or chatbot leaderboards. This is where you find out chatbots have a score the same way chess masters have a score. And there's ways of testing these things so that we know when someone says Claude just edged out GPT-4 and then GPT-4o edged out Claude. This is where they're getting that information, that leaderboard. But it also has what they call the chatbot arena. So you can enter in one prompt and you can see how two large language models will both respond to your same prompt. And you can have longer conversations. And what's neat is it doesn't tell you the names of your fighters. You put in your prompt and it randomly assigns you two models. And there's many more than Dana mentioned, the most important three, but there are dozens. And so by evaluating, you get to vote on which chatbot did you have the better engagement with. You rank that. That's how they determine which of these are doing better. But it's called the Chatbot Arena.
Excellent. Mark?
Well, I think if I only had my $20 to spend, I would spend it on ChatGPT, flat, hands down, right? So I guess I can say that right up front. I'm the same as I think most people right now, and all of the polling that's been done recently, even the poll that David McCorkle did at NGS, clearly shows that ChatGPT is the winner amongst the genealogy crowd. But within ChatGPT, I think there's a incredibly important tool in custom GPTs. Which is a real game changer, particularly if there's a thing that we do all the time. Dana mentioned that, she does a lot of writing support and a lot of, kind of tech support kind of questions. I know I do a lot of data analysis kind of stuff, obituary analysis, summarizations, transcriptions, that kind of stuff. So I create custom GPTs for that. That really kind of takes you from saving, 5 minutes out of a 15-minute exercise. It can take you to saving 13 minutes out of a 15-minute exercise if you kind of really refine and improve a particular prompt and you reuse it, because you'll learn how to really make it sing for you. And the other one that I use a lot is Perplexity. Um, I it has essentially replaced my Google work. I still use Google, like if I know there's a place, I can't remember the URL, like I use it as a link finder. But when I'm trying to learn a thing or I'm trying to do some research on a thing, I really like that AI enhanced search experience that Perplexity defined. Pulling that information together from a bunch of pages, aggregating in a way that I prompted it to, and then giving me links back to it so that I can confirm it. That experience just really works for me. And I know Google's hunting for them. They released their I can't remember what the word is, AI enhanced search or something like that. They called it SGE, Search Generative Experience, up until about last week, and they changed the name. AI enhanced search or something. They changed it to last week. So Google's coming after Perplexity, I got a lot of hope for Google in this. So far, Gemini hasn't really floored me, but they've got so much data and so much of my data. I'm really looking forward to the whole Google workspace environment. I know that they're going to bake that whole generative experience into everything, and so I got a lot of hope for Gemini and integration of Gemini into the Google workspace, but it's not quite there yet for me.
Yeah. Hey, one quick, so I pulled it up to remind us of the name. So when you do the Google search, it's now AI overview. Is that top
Overview.
part?
There we go.
Yeah,
Overview.
where they
That's
explain.
it. Exactly.
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah, and you know what? I think I just had one thought I wanted to follow up with, and the answer to what is your top AI tool recommendation may be whatever tool you're using for the task you're doing right now, right? So, for example, I'm doing a lot of data curation for the update to the Shared Center Morgan project, and I found a great AI tool that plugs into Excel and does a lot of that curation for me, which has already saved me probably hours of time. So for that, I would recommend that tool. So it probably all depends on what task you're doing.
Yeah, I do want to bring up one follow up too, because this is all about genealogy. And I think the greatest AI tool we have in genealogy right now is Family Searches Labs, the new full text search. That is such a game changer. If you guys aren't using that, Google it or Perplexity it, however we're going to start saying that. But it is amazing. I have found one of my biggest finds was my family lived in Perry County, Tennessee forever. They're still there today, so 200 plus years, but they were just in that county. And using that, I found that one of my ancestors had actually bought land 2 counties away. And now I think maybe they were separated, him and his wife at the time. But anyway, I would have never looked anywhere else because that was across the river and I knew they lived there. And anyway, so use that tool or look more into it if you haven't already been using it. Yep.
Full text search is going to change the business for sure. Yeah.
All right, on to the next question. So if we are being, I guess I would say, inundated with AI content, whether it's images, text, whatever we're being inundated with, one of the things that we are concerned about is losing our unique voice and perhaps even our expertise, right? So how can my content still be my content, and how can others recognize it as being my content if I'm incorporating AI generated content? And, keeping all the other stuff aside, issues of how much we should incorporate, issues of attribution. Don't worry about that for right now. Let's just worry about how do I keep my voice unique? Mark, what are some thoughts you have on that?
Yeah, I think about this a lot because I write a lot, and everything from email to blogs to reports. And I think the thing that, like, my secret sauce, the thing that makes my document me or my writing me, like my voice, is the start. It's where I bring my experience and my education and my background and my unique perspective comes across in how I look at a problem. So what I do is I resist the urge to start with a chatbot, because that's handing over the keys to the way that I look at it. If I get a bias, which by definition is an average, right? Like all of these tools, they're just statistical modeling tools, right? So if whatever I get back from a chatbot is essentially the most average perspective kind of on a topic, right? And that's not the perspective that I want. I want my perspective. So I always start with me, and I go like, how am I going to look at it? How am I going to think about it? What's the problem that I see? And then I write that, even if it's in point form. It's the outline. It's like the grade 10 outline to your book report. And I never pick up a chat tool before that.
How about you? Let's see. How about you, Steve?
How do I maintain a unique voice and experience? I guess I'm thinking about maybe three things along a spectrum. One, and I know you said we can ignore attribution for now, but I'll mention it just briefly. In that I saw a post this week, and bad generated AI reeks of bad generated AI. And so everybody can tell a bad AI image or a bad piece of, straight out of the machine chatbot text. And the poster posted it as if, they as if it was their own, and maybe it was, but nobody commented on the post. It just sat out there like a something not good. I don't try to pass off the other stuff, chatbot stuff, as your own. Folks will forget that you actually have a voice.
We didn't talk about this, and I know exactly the post you're talking about.
Yeah,
I saw it,
yeah,
and I laughed out
we all
loud.
saw it.
Just
We
in the
all
last
saw it.
36 hours, I was like, oh, that's terrible.
Yeah, that's
Let
terrible.
me delve into
But
all
see-
of the ways about how it was bad.
Yeah. Now, I haven't written as many blog posts as Dana, Blaine, and Mark, and I haven't been on as many stuff, but I have a unique voice. And if you've been listening for 5 minutes, you probably sound, that's the hillbilly. You're listening to the hillbilly. I want to keep my hillbilly voice. And if I start to pass off AI slop. Actually, that's the good new word for it. Simon Willison, he doesn't want to cuss, so he calls it slop. But the inundation of AI generated trash that we're getting that's going to flood everything is slop. So don't pass off slop as your own. Folks will forget that you're a genuine you underneath. On the other end of the extreme, you can duplicate your voice. I mean, physically, the sound, Blaine's. I mean, I cloned my voice on 11 labs. They're the ones that clone voices. And my mother could tell the difference, but I don't know if my wife could. The cloning of voices, if you actually mean the acoustics of it, they can get really good. But again, we're probably not talking about that. Text, you can actually do that. You could take 50 of your blog posts and say, you could use a prompt like, you are a linguist, you study stylistics, generate 20 characteristics that might be used to describe a person's voice. Now analyze these 50 blog posts and generate a unique linguistic footprint of the voice of this author. And now Steve has a linguistic profile that I can take some. Again, you don't want to pass this off as if it was your own, but it actually can sound a lot like, it'll sound a little bit like a hillbilly. If you want it. Now, the middle spot is what Mark was talking about, the Goldilocks zone. That's where you're using it to generate ideas, to help with the outline, and maybe in some places to help you with your grammar and your cohesion and transitions, and you're using it as a really good editor, and I've never had an editor until this year, but a really good editor is, God, what a blessing. But you can use these tools as an editor to make your bad, rough drafts really good quick. That's how you keep your voice. That's the Goldilocks zone for me right now.
Nice.
How about you, Dana?
Yeah, so Steve said he was going to do 3 points. So I also have 3 points. So my first one is don't just copy and paste everything you see. So don't just grab it all and put it in and say, I'm done. We're still the human in this, and we need to bring our own ideas and editing and bring ourselves to it. Second is if you really want AI not to take over your writing and keep your own voice and stuff, is instead of asking it just to edit your writing straight out, is ask for a bulleted list of things you can do to improve your writing. So I often say, please help me edit this for grammar, spelling, and clarity, and provide a bulleted list. And then I can go through it. And sometimes I just say, yes, or if you say numbered list, I like 1, 3, 7, and 8. Please, let's do those and let's forget about the rest. Or I will just do things myself. And my third one is I sometimes, when I'm asking it to edit, and again, I use Claude. He just seems more like me, and it's more natural. And I say, use mainly my words and my tone. I don't want it to go and replace all my words with better words. I want it to still be me. And so that leaves it with very minor edits when I ask it to do something like that. So those are some ways I like to keep my own voice and keep in this process. Blaine?
Yeah. I mean, I don't really have many other recommendations other than, you know, you don't have to utilize the output you're given as you're given, right? And so I would, if I were to go and utilize some output, it would certainly be edited by me to make sure that my voice is there. And again, I was taking some notes as I was thinking about this question, and although Steve already covered it, I think this is also somewhat of a temporary problem because I do expect to be able to train a tool in the future. I have published so much content out in the world that is publicly available that I should be able to train a tool to use or recognize and then use my voice. I don't expect it ever to be perfect because I also consider my voice to be evolving. So, I started the blog in 2007. I don't think or write the same way I thought in 2007. So I think it's also evolving. But that being said, I think, just make sure you put it back in. Make sure your voice is there because if we're all become AI voices, it's how boring will that be, right? For example, I have a serious problem with using parentheses and exclamation points, and I don't want AI to take that away from me. I love it. So,
And I love to use my exclamation points. I have to cut back on that. I
Me
also
too.
wonder if we're not all going to start using the word delve in our everyday language.
It
So
has been expunged from my voice. I wish I could take back every time I ever used delve in my life so that people wouldn't look back and go,
Yes.
he used delve once.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
It's a telltale sign for those of you who don't use a lot of AI. If you see the word delve, it's most likely AI put it there. Most likely.
Have you learned that they figured out where that came from?
No.
That
Tell.
a lot of the human reinforcement that they outsourced, they would have humans check these things. Well, there was a community in Africa that was cheap labor. And they actually, the word delve is used much more frequently there. So that's why
Makes
the
perfect
word
sense.
delve is coming up. The trainers, the human trainers, were using the word delve.
It had to come from somewhere.
Yeah.
It's just stats. Yep. Cool.
Okay.
All right, next question. And I think this is a great one because there's so much uncertainty about this one. What are some of the implications of utilizing AI to create realistic images of ancestors or historical events or locations throughout history? What do you think about this, Dana?
Yeah. So, again, if those of you who see me on Facebook probably know, I love generating images with AI. I have so much fun with it. But I think there is a big danger in us trying to do realistic images of our ancestors. So it looks like a portrait, or you even say, I want a daguerreotype of my ancestor, something very realistic that could absolutely just be passed on to everybody in our family, and it could just go viral in your own little family world. So I think that's a big danger. I urge people not to do that. It is, of course, our own choices, but it's kind of like, I'm sure there are cases, I think this would be hard to discover, where somebody puts an image and it's the wrong person on their family tree, and we all just save it. And now that is who that person looked like, even though maybe they put the wrong person there. So I think that's very dangerous. But I still love to tell the stories. And I said it on Saturday that a picture's worth 1,000 words. And I think it can still be very powerful way to tell stories. But I personally choose to either use like cartoons or watercolors or block prints, something that is noticeably not something that'd be historic. I think we should be using watermarks. I'm trying to get in that habit. I haven't been, but I just assume kind of like everybody knows I'm generating art. So it's actually, since I do real digital art too, now I label it, this is something I did, so people realize it's me and not AI. But those are a few things. And I'm teaching this course right now, and we just last week were talking about, it focused on image generation and storytelling. And one of the ladies did exactly what I'm wanting to do. She's creating this storybook, and it's like a children's book, and it has one image per 2 pages, and it tells one little story about somebody. And that is where my heart is with the images as far as genealogy right now. And Tom Jones last night, some of you might have caught his Legacy Family Tree webinar about editing. And he said, he talks about writing it up, editing. And then he said, if you don't submit it, you've wasted your time. And I want to say, if you're not writing up your stories and sharing them, you're wasting your time. Or if you're at least not writing it, it doesn't have to be a story, it can be just the facts. But if we're not sharing it, if it's not going anywhere, I'm going to suggest in my thoughts that it's kind of wasting our time. If we're going to go to all this trouble and learn the stories and everything, we should be passing it on in some way. And I think stories and images is a great way to do that.
Excellent. Mark?
Yeah, I remember that moment, which will be a very, very important moment, an inflection point in genealogy history, when AI Time Machine came out from MyHeritage, and I was like, it was like my brain split in two, because I was like, I was so excited because I've got a career in technology and I'm excited by new things, and I was like, oh my God, it's all over, right? We're not going to be able to rely on pictures anymore, and my one of my lifelong passions. Like, I got my first camera when I was 10, and I have 100,000 photos, and probably 20,000 of them. I'm also the family archivist for my family, in addition to being the genealogist. So I've got probably 20,000 photos collected across my family, organized, tagged, into collections by group, by repository, by all that kind of stuff. And so I spend a lot of time looking at pictures, trying to figure out the history of the photo and who's in it and where it was taken and why it was taken, all that kind of stuff. And I lost my mind a little bit when AI Time Machine came out, because although I could tell with that version of the technology, I could eyeball it. Already, there are photos. They do testing now. Most people can't actually identify the photos that can be generated now by a person who's as skilled as Dana. Right? It's getting harder and harder. In fact, almost impossible, except for professionals, to be able to rip in and determine whether it's a photo is a real photo or not. So I'm really worried about that. So I'm a big fan of attribution, watermarking, all of that stuff, and it's kind of going even further right now, because it's not just as a person who spends a lot of time working with photos, even as a family historian. There's even the editing of the photo. There's a whole, people have been worried about editing of photos for a generation now, since the Photoshop days. Just this week, probably the most broadly used editing tool, which is Lightroom, they actually now incorporated AI generated features into Lightroom. So removing people, changing background colors, changing out entire backgrounds is now accessible to people who haven't spent a year learning how to use Photoshop. And it actually takes about a year how to learn Photoshop, right? Now it's soft, select, remove Grandpa Fred because nobody liked Grandpa Fred, right? Like, that kind of stuff worries me too, with even just editing, because people take them, modify them, and it's really, you actually have to be a pro to figure out if somebody's mucked with it. And even then, people won't take the time unless it's a really important photo. So that whole thing, call out to all of the family historians out there, don't do that. Do like what Dana does, and like I do too. I love generative AI, but I go for cartoony, water pastel-y, when you look at it, nobody is going to accidentally think it was real. Right. That's the kind of stuff I like to mess with when it comes to family historian stuff. It's storytelling. It's not trying to make a photo.
Yeah, so I guess I'll jump in. I think for me, there's two aspects of this that I think are important to me. And number one is actually in the Facebook group, genetic or genealogy and artificial intelligence. I think it was maybe 9 months ago, maybe more. We raised the issue of labeling images to ensure that people knew they were generative AI generated, right? And so that's been a problem and a concern for us from day one. And I think one of the things that I would like to see is I would like to see labeling both as a watermark and in the metadata itself by the tool itself. And we're seeing a little bit of that coming out from the tools, which I think is way too slow. And I don't know if maybe there's, a reason for that, or, I'm not sure.
It's money.
Now, obviously, yeah, that's what I think
It's
you're right.
money.
And,
Yep.
Obviously metadata isn't enough, right? Because I can take a screenshot of an image and all that metadata is gone already, right? So it's not perfect, and there's not going to be any perfect process to this. So another aspect of this that I think is important is that this is not going to be for everyone, right? There may be people that just abhor the idea of using AI to create images of an ancestor. And you know what? That's perfectly fine. Just like there's people that love it. However, people that abhor it don't have the right or ability to prevent or prohibit others from doing that, right? So that's just the way this works. If you love it, go for it. If you don't love it, don't do it, right? So it's, we don't get to poo-poo what other people want to do or explore. The thought that genealogy is this single monolithic thing is I think a very dangerous thing, because the danger is that professionalism takes away all the fun of genealogy, right? And that's always been my concern. If this isn't fun anymore, look, I love genealogy, but are any of us getting rich doing genealogy? I don't think we are. So then there has to be some of the love of it in there. And if that's gone, then what's the point anymore? That doesn't mean we need to make genealogy a silly thing, or that it can't be an academic pursuit. But at the same time, don't tell others what they can or can't do with genealogy, because that runs counter to the fun of genealogy, in my opinion. Again, these are all my opinions, right? So that's just my thoughts about it. What about you, Steve?
I have some complex feelings and thoughts about this. And it's going to sound pessimistic to start with, but I'm actually very excited about this. But being the realistic part is there's going to be a fighting of a losing battle. The internet as we knew it from 1992 to 2002 is dead. Most people don't know this yet, but it was happening before generative AI. But the internet as we knew it for its first 30 years is dead. The tsunami of AI generated slop that is coming is good. And the way that AI vendors and Google and other folks now will structure things going forward, it's going to be very different. Our kids and grandkids are going to listen to us talk, reminisce about how wonderful things were in 2007 or 2017 and not understand what we're talking about. So things are good. It could be fighting a losing battle, but I'm not upset about that, because I will assume that unless y'all are talking about watermarking AI generated stuff, no, go the other way. What's going to be important is identifying real stuff. Everything that you're going to assume that everything is fake unless there's a provenance or whatever the art word there is that you can show that something is real. So you're going to have trusted sources. But the reason I'm optimistic about this, think about documentary film. Ken Burns. Ken Burns doesn't use AI generated images, but other documentaries do you know the word documentization? There's folks who make documentary films that do include actors, reenacting things. And they're still able to present factual information in a documentary. And then there's the fuzzy lines that Blaine was talking about. I've really got a deep appreciation now for the broad spectrum of scholastic peer-reviewed articles in hallowed journals, but they're one in a 10,000 compared to the Etsy store owners who want to use these things to create cross-stitch patterns to sell family trees on Etsy. And they're genealogists too. And there's 1,000 of them for every, and so it's a big, big field. And we need to realize that genealogists and family historians, we can get along together and use these tools differently. And for each little community will figure their stuff out. We'll get through this.
I have to chime in again because of what you said about like Ken Burns. I have this little sticky notes on my computer right now that says our name and reputation will matter. So as we continue on this journey and it's hard to know what on the internet is real and what is fake, people are going to turn to who they know they can trust. So you know you can trust Ken Burns. So I want them to be able to trust me and all of you, and because there's going to be so much slop out there. So yeah.
Yeah, I have to follow up on the metadata comment just to geek out on that for just a second, because I've been waiting for the metadata problem to be solved for 20 years, 30 years. And there's been, I've actually been watching, there's actually a metadata working group for genealogy has been in place now, for photos in genealogy, has been in place now for about 3 years. And they are ever so slowly, like all standards groups, marching towards some conclusion. But I worry, like, there's just so much incentive to not solve the problem by companies that, because if you democratize the photo, then everybody can load them and everybody can move their stuff to some other platform. So it's there's a bit of unfortunately, there's a painful disincentive there in the business of keeping different metadata standards that I hope they address. And we keep throwing new requirements at them. So, now we want them to say, incorporate something so we can prove, provenance, right? With photos. So but I hope, I'm with you, Blaine. I hope they solve that problem, because it'll, there's lots of good reasons to generate images, but there's so many good reasons to be able to confirm what the image is as well, that I hope they address it.
Another question that we came across and wanted to discuss is the issue of accuracy and bias. So how do we improve accuracy and reduce bias in this AI-generated genealogical data, or however word you want to use? AI-generated might be strong, AI-enhanced, right? Whatever word we want to use. How do we ensure that it's accurate and has as little bias as possible? I'll just throw out a disclaimer, right? I mean, humans are just biased anyways. I think bias helped us survive and thrive as a species, and so it's completely ingrained. How do we fight that? And maybe AI is the answer. But Steve, what do you think?
Awareness is the key. What you just did in calling out that, this is who we are. There's bias in this because, it's on every different layer. It's in the training data. History is written by the winners. And so we've got 6,000 years of history in these training data written by the winners, written by, Western white men. There's going to be a hugely predominant point of view toward Western white men. And just being aware of that you're going in. But improving the accuracy, we talked about this on the NGS episode. Of course, Blaine made famous for all of us words, not facts. We want to be bringing information to, and this will get better too. Next year, it won't be as much a concern. Last year, it felt like we could, say words, not facts. But this year, it's more tricky. So being aware of just actually being aware of when you're asking an open-ended question, being aware of when you're giving the model elbow room to generate hallucinated or biased responses means you need to be paying attention to look for hallucinated or biased responses. If you're, and the mitigation against that, the protection against that is to have it process the data that you've already, that you're bringing to the table. And your own data may have bias in it, but it will probably eliminate the hallucination part. But being aware of when you're asking open-ended questions where the hallucination might creep in is a key.
That's great. Yeah, it's so true. And this is going to be something that is just not going to be easy to fix. So for me, for example, I have been incorporating the concept of confirmation bias and horses versus the zebra hypothesis for probably more than a decade now. And so confirmation bias is huge in genetic genealogy, but it's a huge problem in genealogy in general. And one of the ways I've previously said to address this is to have a genealogy buddy. I've always said that this genealogy buddy should be mean, but not too mean, right? Because you want them to critique you fairly.
Yeah.
And not be afraid to pull punches. I don't think I would recommend today to use AI as your genealogy buddy solely because of the biases that even will come in there. I mean, granted, your genealogy buddy, the human one, has biases too, right? So I mean, the problem is that what I hope is they don't have the same biases you do, right? They don't care if John is the father of Samuel like you do because you spent 20 years trying to prove it, right? They may look at the data and say, what are you talking about? You jumped to a huge conclusion here. Maybe AI can do that, maybe it can't, but just, consider still having that human genealogy buddy at least today. And maybe that will help a little bit with the bias. So, Mark, what do you think about that?
Well, I'm along that line of the having a genealogy buddy. I guess having a genealogy buddy is a broad way of saying I assume I'm going to make a mistake and I need you to catch them for me, right? And so that's actually what I do. I assume that I'm going to get lied to or I'm going to get hallucinated upon. Pick your verb. I'm going to be told stuff that's incorrect. I assume that. So I mean, past the basics of be clear, like Steve said, be clear, be concise. Ask bounded questions. The more you know about a topic, the better the answer you'll get because you'll ask the question in a way that is most likely to give you a clear answer. That's kind of the basics. And then on top of all of that, I just assume I'm going to get lied to. So I when I'm working on a prompt that's really important or one that I'm going to turn into a custom GPT, I put in a hallucination support set into my prompt where I add stuff like, for example, tell me the things that you think are unclear or provide me okay, my prompt is tell me the three things. Well, give me your rationale for those three things. Or organize it in a table, organize the output in a table so that it's easier for me to check off if I'm just getting a summarization prompt or something like that. So I bake into my prompts a hallucination checker so that it's easy for me to go through and confirm what it is that I'm being told so that it basically makes it easier for me to not be lied to or accidentally, fall in love with a reasonable sounding hallucination.
How about you, Dana?
Yeah, so I think one of the ways we can do this, and I'm better at this when I'm looking at images than text, but is to provide feedback. So that's why they have those feedbacks on there. So as you're reading and you see something and you think there's some bias in there, you can give it a thumbs down and then they have choices. You can pick one of those or add your own little comment. But again, I see that in images. So I want to just talk about images for a moment. But as we've been doing the images, we've seen this transition, that's the word, over time because specifically ChatGPT, again, that was the only one we were all using last year, way back in 2023. But when it started, or at least when I really got into it, when you asked for an image of a group of people, it was very diverse. You would get lots of different people, different from different places and everything. And then it became, so I would say early, maybe late last year, early this year, if you asked for a person, 99% of the time it was a white woman. And that's just what it was. I'm in lots of art groups on Facebook, and everything we were sharing, because we usually are talking about a person on the beach or a person in the park or whatever, and it was always a white female. And it has, on ChatGPT, it has swung back the other way, that just in the past few weeks, we're starting to see more diversity again. So that's something when we're seeing, and then there's been the issues where it's went too far. And, was it Gemini that they had to pull, and they're not doing people right now because they messed up big time. And that's the kind of things, if we see something, say something. But anyway, give it a thumbs down, say, this is not working right, but provide feedback because that's helping the training process.
Oh, that's
a
good.
great
Good
recommendation.
point.
I hadn't thought about that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really important.
Thank you.
All right. So our last question. What is one of your favorite AI resources to keep up to date and understand the uses of artificial intelligence, particularly with regard, I think, to genealogy, but maybe not, maybe just how to use these in general, right? So I will introduce my own bias. here with my answer, and I will answer the Genealogy
Can I
and
guess?
Artificial Intelligence Facebook group. I think it's really, I mean, again, I'm super biased about this, but if you're a Facebook user, I do recommend joining it because there is a wide range of users, right? There is the very beginner user. I've seen people post in there. I have no idea what to do. I have no idea where to start. And then we have, Steve answering all kinds of questions. And, so you get the benefit of that entire range, right? That the beginner to the expert. And so I learn things in there every single day. Every single day I learn something new in there. And so I think just if I have to list just one resource, I think that's a good place for you to start if you're a Facebook user. What about you, Dana?
Yeah, absolutely. That is probably the best place to keep track of genealogy and AI right now. Excuse me. And we are all posting when we're discovering or finding out things. We're putting it there. So that's the one place, if that's, it's how much time do you have? But that's a great starting place. So for me, and I'm wanting to stay up to date with what's going on in the AI world, but I don't have an AI background or big tech background. I've just, like I said, Saturday, I've just really gotten into it in the past year. So I have a newsletter and it's a podcast that I read. So it's called The Neuron and it comes out, I think it's Monday through Friday. It's whenever it hits my box, but it's Monday through Friday. But I like it's short. It just takes, 3 to 4 minutes to read, and yet it's hitting all the big stuff. And then they just recently started the weekly podcast, which is also short. It's like 15 minutes approximately of time. And it's written for everyday people. Again, it's not expecting you to have a huge background in what it's talking about. And so for me, for an everyday regular person that's not a computer background person, it's a great place for me to learn. Yet they use the word delve all the time, and lately I'm starting to wonder who's writing this. But I love the guys. I mean, it's very good stuff. So.
Yeah, and I'll just no. I also read the Neuron, and I absolutely love it. And I have no idea how these people have the time to do this every day. I'm pretty sure they're either completely AI or they're not sleeping, one or the other. So,
Maybe.
yeah. What about you, Steve?
Well, again, the Facebook group is the center of the universe. If you're not doing that, don't even listen to some of these other things first, unless you're an absolute Facebook hater. But you're missing out the center of the universe. 97% of what's happening in AI genealogy is in this group. And as Dana mentioned, it's where discoveries are broken. It's where we share new things. And so that's huge. But also podcast. And I love the Neuron. And I'm going to do the same. I'm going to do the Goldilocks thing again. The Neuron is where I would start. That's the 15-minute easy middle of the road, accessible, very good start. If you wanted one on either end of the spectrum, one that's a little bit more technical, and another one that is a little bit more humorous, edgy, and may not be suitable for everybody. But the one that's technical, there's two PhDs, recent PhD AI researchers, and now they're both doing AI startups, but they're wicked smart and they're articulate. They're not trying to talk to other PhDs. They're trying to talk to you. They're trying to talk. Now, the Neuron is right down the middle, but this is a little bit technical, but it's called Last Week in AI. Last Week in AI, and and they have a newsletter too. It's a podcast and a newsletter. And the URL is lastweekinai.ai. And it's long. It's not short. It's once a week, once every 10 days, and sometimes it's an hour, 90 minutes, 2 hours. I listen to it while I'm mowing the lawn, and it's great. They cover everything and they go deep, deep, deep. Now, on the other end of the spectrum, this one is um, these two guys are they're not comedians, but you will laugh. They are very funny. It's called AI for Humans, and the URL is aiforhumans.show. I didn't even know that was a top level domain, but it's aiforhumans.show. And they they're funny, but they cover the weekly news very, very well. And they go deep into the issues, but in a funny, humorous way. that unless you've just got something stuck somewhere it shouldn't be and you have no sense of humor, you will appreciate this. These guys are really funny.
And
AI for Humans.
and how long is that one? I'm not familiar with it.
That one is also longer. That one
Okay.
is weekly or 10 days, and it also
Yeah.
may run 45 to 90 minutes. That's another one while you're mowing the lawn or driving, something
Okay.
like that.
Excellent. How about you, Mark?
Everything that everybody said. Although I think of all of them, like everything that's been said so far, obviously the Facebook group, there's nowhere else to start. AI for Humans is hilarious. I hadn't heard about it until Steve mentioned it to me, so I listen to it all the time now. But there's two other things. Well, one in particular for the people who are listening to this who are trying to figure out how to get started, like that when they're in the first 10% of their journey, and like for me, the hardest part about moving into AI or any new technology for that matter is how do I think about this? And there's a different style of thinking because artificial intelligence, it's a different approach. We have been trained for the last 30, 40 years on using tools. A lot of those rules don't apply. And so we're breaking some models here. So Ethan Mollick's new book, Co-Intelligence,
Yes.
if anybody is thinking about getting into this and like wants to use this for genealogy or other things, it's a very, very accessible book that anybody could read. If they can read the book, they can understand the content. And more than anything, it's not a how-to book; it's a how to think about it book. And so that's a really, really good book to get started on. In fact, I think everybody in this room we've talked about before have listened to it 2 or 3 or 4 times, or read it 2 or 3 or 4 times, or both, right?
Yep.
Um, but but the one that I use, podcasts have turned out to be the place that actually, if you're trying to keep up, I absolutely agree. Podcasts it seems to be where the best information is coming for currency, and AI for Humans is a good, funny one. But they cover the important topics just in kind of a comical way. For myself, because I've kind of got that business IT background, I've found two podcasters that theirs is called the Artificial Intelligence Show, and it's pretty geeky. There's some technical parts of it, but they really talk about the business of artificial intelligence and how it's being adopted, and the stories behind the stories. Who bought whom, the new techniques that are being developed, and who the developers are, that kind of stuff. And for the people who like that kind of stuff, like I do, that kind of gives you a hint about where things are going. It's another way to look at the development of AI, is who's doing what and who's buying whom, and the tools that they're working on. Sometimes you can take a guess at what's coming in 3, 4, 5, 6 months if you're watching kind of those machinations. So I really like that show, the Artificial Intelligence Show, and it's every week, 60 to 90 minutes.
All right. Well, believe it or not, that's it. That's the questions that we had, and I hope everyone enjoyed it. And certainly, I will say, give this a thumbs up and leave a comment as to what you liked, what your thoughts are on any of these questions. If you have any other questions, and on my part, I will say thank you again for all of you for what you do for the field and for joining that plenary session at NGS, and then us doing all this together, I think is fantastic, and I enjoyed every minute of it.
Thank you, Blaine.
Thank
And
you.
thank you all for joining us again. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Now there's a
All
different.
right. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We, as you may know, recently did a plenary session, the four of us at.
I keep forgetting the multiple computers and which one's controlling what. I want to bring to your attention also the right-hand column. There are other topics of videos related to genealogy, etc., and maybe AI too. For this one here, if you click on more underneath the video, you may find information that they talked about, particularly in that last 10-15 minutes. They gave a lot of references to some things that I never heard of outside of this video. And I am a part of a AI group that has a meeting once a month with somebody that has been deep in AI for last a year or more and created the group. So it's something else. Also, on most videos really, go down below here and you get the comments section and should peruse through them because sometimes you come up with extra pieces of information that aren't in the original video that somebody who looked at the video submitted to anybody who reads the comments. And you can get extra information that otherwise you got to keep searching for to get the answers to. So I wanted to bring that to everybody's attention before we go further. And I'm going to stop the share. Okay. Does anybody have any comments or questions that somebody might be able to answer in what the topic was about? Nobody's got any comments. Did anybody follow along and understand what was being said and why with regards to the AI and genealogy? Everybody's on mute.
I took myself off mute. I liked what they were talking about. I did miss a small portion because my computer went away on me because it was updating and I got back. But it was quite interesting. I liked the way they presented it. And what can I say? I'll have to get a little deeper into AI. So the AI for humans, I'll be going after.
Well, you can also get into the medical field and maybe come up with new drugs or treatments to take care of our maladies.
Well, I have to say I've got too many drugs and treatments already, so no thank you.
Yeah, but you might improve upon
Are they covered by Medicare?
You got to try. Anybody got any other comments or questions? Well, we had a pretty good group. We had a few people come in and out. Bert?
Well, I think AI certainly in their discussion about genealogy was just one piece, but I mean, they talked about the concept of photos and ownership a lot. How would you watermark the photos or identify them as being your own property?
Oh, you would have copies of the photos, and a lot of the editing programs can put in a watermark.
But is a watermark enough to be able to say it's yours? Or that's just anything, anybody can say it's anything?
You would have to make a some kind of a personalized watermark, not a general watermark.
The answer is there are ways of inserting digital bits and bytes which are very definitely unique, and there's a large number you could put in without degrading the digital image.
And the
I think
metadata, the
keeping
met,
the property ownership is going to be something that because of it's really available to the public whenever you're using these things, that's going to come up as a major issue, um, especially because, okay, we just ran this YouTube video. Was that legal or not legal?
well, that's where that one guy came in about the metadata of photographs, and they're trying to get something in the way of a modification of the metadata standards that would allow for this unique identification to every image you create.
And they could take a page out of the NFTs and create a blockchain which would have a unique transaction number.
That's another possibility too.
But I think that's a whole future we have to look forward to.
Oh, it's we're barely scratching the surface of AI and what we might be able to do, what we may not be able to do, uh, and of course, the rate our legal system develops laws and regulations. None of us might be here by the time they actually create laws and regulations that have any true impact on AI and what is generated.
Of course, we won't be here, but our data will.
Yeah. All right. Anybody got any further information or ideas on this? Not hearing anything else, Nat. I remind everybody, Sanford and I are both looking for other people with either some ideas we might be able to research and eventually do a presentation on, but we're also looking for people to do 5, 10, 15-minute presentation. You don't have to do 50 minutes to an hour type presentation. But if you got something, contact one of us and let us know so that we can try and work you in. If we've got to try and do it, we got to find the time to do enough research to at least address the issue. But I'm more of a researcher into that stuff. The Linux group that was on Tuesday, I had mined more than 100 videos, and I barely got through a quarter of them for that Linux group meeting. And so I got a lot more I can go through on the same one topic, but odds are most of it I will be using myself personally, and it may not appear in any of the future meetings. But in any case, I hope Sanford will be back for next Tuesday's Tips and Tricks SIG. I've got to create the material that he usually uses, and that's what's going to keep me busy the next couple days. And we only have one meeting next week. The following, a week from this coming Tuesday, will be the South Suburban Computer Club meeting. And then there's never a Northwest Computer Club meeting by Ed Keating in December. He feels he's too busy to bother with creating a presentation and doing the meeting. So I'm usurping his December 19th date on Thursday in 2 weeks from tonight for our Linux group, which otherwise would have to be on Christmas Eve, and I am not doing any presentation on Christmas Eve. Then we'll all have to wait until next year. That's a long, long time to go before our next meeting. And I'm not sure, hang on a minute. Gotta check one thing here. And let's see here. The one thing I don't know, West Side meeting would be on January the 2nd. And I'm kind of suspicious that Sanford is going to skip that. But I don't know that for a fact. I think I brought this up at a board meeting, and I don't think I got a straight answer on that. But normally when West Side is this early to New Year's Day, he usually skips it because a lot of people may be still traveling or something like that. So a lot of times he'll skip a meeting. We're all going to have to wait and see if he has that January 2nd meeting or not. The rest of the month should go as normal schedule. Anybody got anything last minute?
I think your presentation choice of that video was excellent.
That I actually here's the thing. A lot of these videos and other articles that I bring up and I put in the more FYI, I would say somewhere between 70 and 80% are ones I stumbled across, not what I was looking for. And it's only the other that I was looking for that I had the opportunity to find all these other articles and videos that I collect and then try and disseminate them as much as I can. After all, we are education oriented, not-for-profit organization. Terry, you can go to sleep now. All right, I'm gonna call this quits, and hopefully some of you will show up next Tuesday for the tips and tricks meeting, and the following week at least the South Suburban Computer Club.